My name is Lila Mickelwaite, and I'm the Manager of Policy and Public Affairs for Exodus Cry. Often people are confused when they hear the word trafficking, because trafficking automatically makes you think of movement. You think of going from one place to another place. And although that is a part of what human trafficking is, that is not all that it is. In fact, most human trafficking and modern-day slavery is happening within domestic borders, within the borders of a nation, without any movement taking place. And so first of all, human trafficking is modern-day slavery, and it's really defined by the exploitation of a person's vulnerability. It's the movement, it's the harboring, it's the receipt of persons for the purpose of exploitation, and that happens through force, fraud, coercion, the giving or receiving of payments to even achieve the consent of a person to have control over another person. So slavery definitely is alive and well in our society today, and many people don't know that, or when they hear about that, they're shocked and they're horrified. They can't believe that this is still happening. They thought that slavery was abolished. When Lincoln, abolished slavery in America, when we hear William Wilberforce abolishing slavery in the UK, they think, that's not possible. It's not happening today, but it really is happening. It's a more hidden form of slavery because it's not illegal slavery. It's illegal in every country in the world to have slaves. And it takes many forms, slavery today. We have sexual slavery, which is enshrined in this glamorization of the industry of prostitution around the world, which keeps it hidden from many people, where they can't see the exploitation that's happening to many millions of women and children all over the world in the prostitution industry. We have child soldiers, we have organ trafficking, we have labor trafficking. There's so many different kinds of forms of modern slavery today, but the important thing to know is that it is happening, and it's not only happening way out there in some other country, it's happening in your country. The International Labor Organization estimated that there were 137 ethnicities exploited in human trafficking in 118 different nations, and that was their estimate in 2012. And so we know that it's happening in almost every country in the world, and so it's important for us to first become aware that this is an injustice that is happening right now, and there are things that people can do to take action against it. In historical slavery, slavery was actually legal. It was legally practiced. Today, in every nation in the world, slavery is illegal. So there's no documentation of slaves in today's slave trade. In fact, legal ownership or proof of ownership is actually avoided. So that's one of the first factors and first differences. And the second difference is that in historical slavery, there were a shortage of potential slaves. In today's world, we've seen an explosion in the population in the world, especially in countries where you find extreme poverty. So you have extreme poverty, you have disease, you have war, you have so many factors that compound to produce a vast population in the world today of extremely vulnerable people. Another issue is that the cost of a slave in historical slavery was quite high. It was a rather large investment for a slave owner to purchase and own a slave. In the past, the equivalent would be a cost of about $40,000 to purchase a slave. Today, the average around the world to purchase a slave is about $90, according to Kevin Bales. And so you can see that there is an extreme difference. And what does that actually mean? Well, that means that today's slaves are essentially disposable people. They are inexpensive, they are widely available because of the population explosion, and so slaveholders today are a lot more brutal in the way that they treat their slaves, and so there is an extreme violence. There's no care for the slaves. If they are not producing anymore, they are disposable, they are discarded. Also, in historical slavery, the ethnicity of a person was really an important factor in whether they would become a slave or not. And today, ethnicity doesn't matter at all. It's just the vulnerability, it's the availability, and it's the profitability of the person that really makes the difference. It is very important to understand the connection between prostitution and sex trafficking, and to understand that we can never effectively combat sexual trafficking unless we really take a serious look at the industry of prostitution. There was research that was produced by researchers at the London School of Economics in 2012. These researchers did a quantitative empirical analysis of 150 different countries, and they found that on average, nations with legal prostitution had an increase in human trafficking. They also saw the reverse, that nations that had systems of criminalized prostitution, specifically criminalizing the purchase of sex, had a reduction in instances of human trafficking. And so it's very, very important for us to focus on reducing the demand for prostituted women and children in order to effectively combat sex trafficking. We can never and we can no longer look at these two things as completely separate issues. They must be addressed simultaneously. The first step is to understand prostitution for what it is, which is a form of violence against women, not a job. Research that has been done over the past 20 years shows us that prostitution is a form of violence against women. For example, there was a study that was published in the American Journal. It's a scientific research journal that was done in 9 different countries. The researchers interviewed 854 prostituted women, and what they found was that 95% of these women were physically assaulted, seriously physically assaulted, that 75% of these women were raped, often more than one time, and that 68% of these women suffered from post-traumatic stress disorder at the same level as treatment-seeking combat veterans and victims of state-organized torture. Not only that, but women in prostitution suffer from traumatic brain injury at the same rate as torture survivors and battered women. Women in prostitution, as shown by research, are truly victims of violence. And the reason is because prostitution is not a job. Prostitution is a form of violence against women. And so realizing that is the first step in being able to effectively legislate and work to combat demand for prostituted women. There's many ways that we need to go about combating modern-day slavery, and we really need to take a holistic approach, which, is rescuing women out of slavery. It's restoring women. It's preventing slavery, and that is the area that law reform really fits in, is prevention, because it's one thing to rescue a woman, but if we can prevent it from happening in the first place, that is where we're going to make the most progress in combating this injustice. And so law reform is an extremely important piece of the puzzle. When we think about historical slavery, we think of the major steps that were taken to combat historical slavery and essentially to end historical slavery. We think of those momentous moments, like what Abraham Lincoln did in the United States. We think of William Wilberforce and what he did in enacting laws in the UK. And law reform and the changing of laws is so important to changing the behavior of a people. So when you have a law that is sanctioning the buying and selling of human beings, like you have in nations where prostitution is legal or decriminalized, which in fact is about 50% of the nations in the world, what you're essentially saying is that we as a people, we as a community of people in this nation are saying that it is okay to buy and sell a person for sexual exploitation. And so coming against that is so important. One of the things that I advocate for around the world is a progressive model of legislation that was first adopted in Sweden in 1999. And what they do is they see women and children in prostitution as victims of violence. So they do not criminalize the sale of sex, but they criminalize the purchase of sex, and they arrest men for buying sex, and they give them a felony level offense to buy sex. And so what that does, it not only apprehends men who actually are committing the crime of buying sex, but it acts as a very strong deterrent. And what they found in Sweden was in 10 years, from the time they enacted the law in 1999 to 10 years later, there was a 50% reduction in street prostitution in Sweden. And then Norway saw the success of Sweden, and 10 years after Sweden enacted their law, Norway enacted the same law where they criminalized not the sale of sex, but the purchase of sex. And in Norway, in 1 year after they enacted this law, they saw a 50% reduction in prostitution, indoor and outdoor prostitution. And those countries have some of the lowest rates of human trafficking in the entire European Union. So we've seen that this is an extremely successful model, and it's something that we've been promoting and advocating for around the world in nations where there currently is a system of legal or decriminalized prostitution. When we think of, the verses that are really the verses that we as abolitionists really look towards, one of the key chapters that we look towards is Isaiah 42. In summary, it says, "Behold my servant Jesus, who will bring forth justice to the nations. He will not grow faint nor be discouraged until he has established justice. And the coastlands wait for his law." The coastlands actually are waiting for the law of the Lord. And so it is so important when fighting injustice of any kind to be establishing the law of the Lord in the land, as in making a statement that we as a people do not accept this injustice. And so that is one reason why it's extremely important for Christians to be engaging in government, engaging in changing the laws of the land. If people are interested in getting involved in government reform, the first place that you need to go is to your knees and really pray into that first. Ask God for direction on where He wants you to go, and for Him to open the doors for you and to guide you, and He will. And it's really the most important thing that you can do in fighting this injustice. Another way that you can begin to get involved in combating human trafficking by addressing the law is to do screenings of the film Nefarious, which is a documentary that Exodus Cry produced that focuses specifically on sex trafficking. It focuses on the connections between prostitution and sex trafficking. And it takes a really good look at ways that we can change the law in addressing the issue of prostitution and sex trafficking. And so getting that DVD and contacting your legislators and doing a screening with them, a private screening, a group screening, and then opening up that discussion and providing information to them about the statistics of why prostitution is a form of violence against women. The statistics that we know have proven that legal prostitution and decriminalized prostitution increases human trafficking. And then presenting them a way forward where they can adopt a progressive model of legislation that has been proven to be effective in combating human trafficking would be an excellent step if you're living in a nation where you currently have a system of decriminalized or legal prostitution. That would definitely be a first step. Also, you can go to our website where we have some amazing resources to help you take those first steps forward. The website is www.exoduscry.com, and you can go to our resources page, and we have books, we have articles, we have teachings available that can begin to help equip you to get those tools and to get those weapons that you really need in order to go into this battle and fight against this injustice in an effective way.